According to Dick Filth, the imbroglio started when Hecuba crashed the party and was spotted by Ms. Nikki Sterling, about whom Hecuba had said in a recent film review, and I'm sorry, this is going to contain some salty language, that it was, quote, unclear whether she'd win any beauty contest, but she sure could suck cock, unquote. It was apparently the beauty contest crack that had hurt Ms. Sterling's feelings, and on seeing HH and suffering the relaxation of social inhibitions for which entertainment parties of all kinds are famous, the starlet made a beeline for Hecuba, uttered 2 high-volume expletives, and attempted to strike the print journalist with an open-handed right cross, whereupon HH had the presence of mind, aided perhaps by the 6-inch heels that made Ms. Sterling's balance precarious and forced her to telegraph the blow, to grab her hand before it could knock his trifocals off. Whereupon, in turn, Ms. Jasmine St. Clair, seeing Harold Hecuba clutching the upraised hand of an agitated and off-balanced Nikki Sterling, performed a set pick off the 3-foot width of Ron the Hedgehog Jeremy and leapt on Hecuba's back and deployed what Filth averred was a pretty authentic and impressive-looking LAPD-style chokehold, prompting Hecuba to whirl 360 degrees in an effort to dislodge Ms. St. Clair, while he still had the cerebral oxygen to do so, inadvertently whip-cracking Ms. Sterling into Randy West and mussing Ms. Sir West Coiffure for the first time in industry memory, and, to the best of Filth's recollection, simultaneously dislodging HH's special autofin trifocals and sending them out in an arc across the room and into the forbidding décolletage of Ms. Christy Candian, never to be recovered, the glasses, or even seen ever again. Now imagine
Wow, I really miss David Foster Wallace.
Now imagine me sitting in front of 2 corporate lawyers at Hachette Philippaki, the parent company of Little Brown, by the way, the publisher of The Pale King, sitting across from me and looking at me and saying, so did that really happen? Well, Jasmine St. Clair once throttled Evan Wright. Well, that's not the same thing as doing a set pick off the 3-foot width of Ron Jeremy, and I'm like, and this was my defense throughout the whole process. This is where literary theory and postmodernism training and all that stuff really come in handy. I said to our lawyers, this guy's a really big deal. We're going to let him get away with it. And they said, all right. The other weird thing, though, is that there's all kinds of stuff in here that's completely unverifiable as fact. And we couldn't verify when he's talking about 133,000 square feet of casino alone in Caesar's Palace. Honestly, we couldn't verify that. On the other hand, he would include things that were seemed deliberately put in to torture the fact checkers, e.g., when Stephanie Swift goes up to the and accepts her Best Actress in Video and tells the crowd, "Thanks everybody, my gangbang was a blast," footnote 51. Though Ms. Swift won for miscreants, and this is going to be disgusting again, she is here actually alluding to her and director R. Black's real breakthrough video in 1997, Gangbang Angels, which is essentially a one-woman show and features the year's most infamous scene. 12 woodmen line up and do an about-face, and S. Swift performs analingus on each in turn. She then kneels and assumes a prayerful, compliant posture, as the 12 men all do a right face and form a moving line and take turns hawking and spitting in her face, which I and my fact-checkers sat 12, yes. Ms. Swift, incidentally, recently survived breast cancer and became a born-again Christian. And I really wanted to call Dave and ask him what he made of that. So anyway, I've gone on way too long, but what this made me think about was not just the porousness of fact between fact and fiction and its relative proximity to truth, because I feel that Big Red Sun is a very truthful article, even though huge amounts of it are made up. But I'm also thinking about the divided self and the various divided selves of Dave. I'm thinking about Infinite Jest, which I see as an autobiographical coming-of-age novel in which Dave is both Helen Candenza and Don Gately. And I'm thinking of the fact that he calls himself David Wallace in this memoir portion of The Pale King, whereas in personal life he never referred to himself, with me he never referred to himself as Dave Id. He always said, "Glenn, it's Dave Wallace." Or he would say, actually the first 4 times we spoke, "Mr. Kenny, it's Dave Wallace," which made me crazy, and I finally had to say, "Stop calling me Mr. Kenny. I'm only 3 years older than you." But he had a very, he did what he felt was proper, because he felt that in the editor-writer relationship that you deferred to the editor and you spoke to him, you called him Mr. And eventually it got to be different than that. Anyway, yes, I miss him. and I miss him as a writer. I miss him as a person. You know, we didn't have a kind of relationship where we talked that often, but like, the phone would ring and I'd pick it up and he'd say, "What happened to Mickey Rourke's face?" Because I became his like point person for movie talk whenever he wanted to do that. So it'd be like, I think he had a lot, you know. So anyway, but yes. So I think these aspects of the book, the relation between the author writing the page, the construction of the author who's talking in the author's foreword and so on, is one of the features that I'm going to be looking at and most carefully, I guess.
I want to know what people think about that, about the presence of David Wallace, the David Wallaces, the David Walleye, in The Pale King. I wrote a piece about this book, and I wrote around those parts, even though they're quite long, and they catch the eye because, of course, it's a character named David Wallace. I guess because I didn't understand them, and I felt it's one of those moments where I became very frustrated with the book, simply because you have the author saying, "Here is the author. I'm speaking to you. The fictional bullshit is over." And also, all that postmodern, quote-unquote, titty-pinching stuff that you hate and then I hate, that's over too. Now we're going to speak to each other like two human beings. And then, of course, he proceeds to play a little game where he ducks in and out of reality, saying things about himself that are true and are not. I wonder what you guys made of that, because it was a moment where I actually felt quite frustrated. And I thought, I really thought to myself, is this a game you're playing? And if it is, do you think this is a game? Are novels a game? Because I'm incredibly like over earnest and literal as a reader, and I couldn't stand it. I didn't have the patience for it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. One thing that the first time he breaks in as authorial voice guy comes after ungodly good piece of writing that deals in a character of a young girl who's going to be watching her and her mom are on the run, and it's vivid, and it's one of those original voices where if you've kind of paid it, know his short fiction, you know, like in John Billy, for example, that once in a while he can inhabit these very earthy, salty landscapes with elevated language, and it's just breathtaking. It's that's the shit. Okay.
It's amazing, and it just
Now,
it's an accident of the Peachian, ordering, but coming right after this moment where you've really got some fucking skin in the game. You care about these characters a lot, and then there's a moment where he says, "But this is all a game. It's just fiction."
Well, that was what I was kind of going to say, is that the next section is after that we get, okay, here's a metafictional moment, and here's the author busting into, and for the first time kind of popping the balloon of walls. And until we don't know how it's going to end. We don't know what it would have come to. There is a thread in the book, and there's reasons. There seems to be a reason for it to be in there, but it doesn't play out in a way where for us to know whether it would have justified itself.
But it's laid out right there. It's right here. It's on page 73. Look at what he says. Plus, there's the autobiographical fact that, like so many other nerdy, disaffected young people of that time, I dreamed of becoming an artist, i.e. someone whose adult job was original and creative instead of tedious and drone-like. My specific dream was of becoming an immortally great fiction writer, a la Gaddis or Anderson, Balzac or Perec, okay?
Well, I hear you, and that's what I was going to kind of get to the idea of where Wallace was coming from when he grew up, the idea of him being influenced by, avant-garde writers and kind of that first generation of postmodernism. Now, we don't know how it would have played out in this book for obvious reasons.
But it's also Balzac and Anderson in there, too.
Well, yes. There's references there, and he's doing things that have been done and that he's done. Here's one of the things that I was going to try and move towards in my own discursive way. Infinite Jest preconceives kind of our internet world in the sense that it's fragmented. We've got the footnotes. His earlier work also does some of that. And we now have reached a point where, you know, in the 90s, this wasn't, or especially in the early 90s and even the late 80s before that, this was a big deal. And it went against ideas of popular entertainment. And for a guy who started off writing essays about RoboCop, which is an early Foster Wallace essay, and who really grew up kind of on the peripheries of this junk culture, you know, that fourth wall and that postmodernism, it was a new thing, and it was cleansing, and it's exciting. And he prefigures and kind of sees a world where it's going to be fragmented out. Now we're at a point where, and I think Lev, from a review of someone's novel, may have suggested that narrative is one of the answers to this fragmentation, you know? And that's something that he knew about, and he, in many essays, kind of talked about his own impatience with postmodern games. But he also couldn't stop himself from, you know, he still couldn't stop himself and still wrote. And I think there is an idea to Wallace's work that is, look, I'm going to throw the whole fucking sink at you. And it's language. It's going to be the best language because I know more words than anybody else. And it's going to be the longest sentences, and they're going to be so good, and the pages are going to be so good that when you get done with one 3-page sentence, it's going to be like the best cake you've ever eaten. And as you start the next bite, you're going to be hungry all over again. And it's this huge bar, and it's up, and the reader has to be involved, and it's up to you, where either victory or death, either you come along or you get left behind. That's so at odds with how people live now, and with the amount of work that people are willing to do, and that most of us are willing to do in just about anything, let alone a book or a fiction book, you know, a novel, a little fantasy. You know, just tell me how he gets the fucking golden goblet, and let's move on. Let's get a dragon in here, whatever. It's so far removed. And, you know, the tides changed, the mood changed, the cultural moment changed. And that doesn't necessarily invalidate what he was doing, but it did, you know, also when 900 different writers and Scream 4 and every other person adopts this metafictional idea, you know, our patience for it changes. In this book, what I read wasn't working, but there's also a very earnest 70-page section that's turgid as that fucking pillar that also probably wasn't working. And I don't know. I don't know how it would have worked out. Yeah. You know, who can say?
We used to argue about Perec. Not argue, but he didn't trust Perec. He had read Life, a User's Manual, and he admired the technique and the structure of it. He didn't quite trust it. And then he read W, or The Memory of Childhood, and he came around and realized that Perec's gamesmanship, and this is also evident in La Desperation, which was translated by Gilbert Adair's Avoid, that Perec's gamesmanship was also a reflection of a very specific emotional state. It's all about loss. The absence of the letter E in La Desperation is his parents being dead in the Holocaust. You know, same with, and so there was this thing that Perec did where it wasn't, you know, there was this very French jouissance to a lot of the stuff, but there was also, I mean, when he's talking about disappearing, he's really talking about disappearing. And to take the most crucial letter in the French language, also in the English language, E out, it's more than just, you know, it obviously is a virtuoso show of linguistics, but it's taking out his heart, you know what I mean? So there's that level at which the postmodern games actually